This is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. We are watching the legend Garry Kasparov face off against Hikaru Nakamura at the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. Kasparov starts with d4, knight f6, Hikaru. He likes the Nimzo Indian. Yep, we see the Nimzo Indian here. Knight c3, bishop e4. Garry taking a look at Hikaru there. Let's see which line of the Nimzo Garry chooses. So many different possibilities here for white. Queen c2 is what Garry has played for the last couple of years in all of these Blitz tournaments, but taking a little bit of time here. There's also e3, there's bishop g5. White's got a huge menu of options. Hikaru, a specialist in the Nimzo Indian. He's been playing it for many, many years. And indeed, queen c2, the traditional mainline. Castles, little issue there. Both players smiling. Bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, following the main line. d5, this is all normal. Knight f3 by Garry. Now black generally takes on c4 in this position, and Hikaru does, and then plays b6 and gets that bishop out to a6, attacking the queen. Garry with a smile plays h4, and that is a move that Garry has patented. He's played it a couple of times. He's one of the only ones who has made this move as he continues looking up to Hikaru, gauging his reaction. Hikaru doesn't seem too amused. h4, a dangerous move. White gets started on the attack. White wants to play h5 and h6 because why not? Who doesn't want to attack when all of your pieces aren't developed? Hikaru strikes at the center with c5, following the general rule. If there's a move on the flank, you strike in the center. Kasparov takes on c5. Is this a pawn sacrifice? I think it is. Now, is Hikaru going to recapture on c5, or is he going to play a tempo move such as bishop a6? No, he takes on c5, and now a big choice for Garry. Garry can grab that pawn on c5, but then the queen is going to become really vulnerable, and black can start developing with tempo. Knight a6, knight e4. So Garry could also make a developing move, or he could keep pushing his h-pawn. He could play h5 and threaten to play h6 and induce a lot of weaknesses on black's king side. Now, Garry's king is still in the center. It's not very safe, but Hikaru hasn't completed his development. So I don't think white's king is in any imminent danger. This might be a good opportunity to keep pushing that h-pawn. Garry taking his time here. The third option is to develop with a move like bishop g5, and Garry going for h5. This is the principled option. And now another dilemma for Hikaru. Does black allow white to push that pawn all the way to h6? In that case, the dark squares are going to be so very weak. I think Hikaru has to push his h-pawn up to h6, halting the progress of Garry's h-pawn. But you can also play bishop a6. You can put the emphasis on piece development. You can give a check on a5. That doesn't look too effective. Hikaru does go for h6. And once again, the same decision for Garry. Does he take on c5, or is he going to push that g-pawn up? Because the pawn on h6 is now a hook. If Garry can get his g-pawn and run it up to g5, that's going to cause a lot of problems on black's king side. So Hikaru, he's going to have to speed it up on the other side of the board if he doesn't want Garry to run him off the board of the king side. But for now, Garry taking his time. He's definitely lower on the clock here. You can see the concentration on his face. He's no longer looking up at Hikaru, mumbling to himself there. What is he going to do? Will he grab that pawn on c5, or will he play g4? And there's the answer. Garry going g4, going as principled as possible. He's going for Hikaru's throat. And now Nakamura, he's got no time to waste, because if Garry gets g5 in, things are going to get really nasty on the king side. Now, Hikaru could play bishop a6. He could also bring his queen up to d5 and offer a trade of queens, and he does. Now, the thing is, Garry seems a little bit surprised by the move. The endgame isn't out of the question for white, and Garry almost immediately takes the queen. Hikaru recaptures with a knight. A little bit surprised at that. I thought maybe taking with a pawn would have fixed the pawn structure. Now, black's got this very weak pawn on c5, and guess what? Just because the queens are off the board doesn't mean that white can't still attack on the king side, and there Garry goes, g5. If anything, white doesn't have to worry about the safety of his king anymore. I really like Garry's position. He's got the two bishops. He's got a lot of attacking potential on the king side. He's moving with confidence, and Hikaru still has that really weak pawn on c5 that he has to deal with. I think black is worse here. This h4 idea by Garry, it's worked to perfection, but Hikaru, he is so well known for his ability to get out of these situations. First of all, he's got to complete his development. Knight c6, bishop b7. His queenside pieces are still on their initial squares. How is he going to arrange those pieces? Hikaru twirling the pawn, thinking about how to position things. He goes f6. First, he hits the bishop. Garry going to probably drop it back to d2. Let's see. Hesitating a little bit there. He brings it back to d2. Garry certainly doesn't want to give up either of his bishops. And this idea of playing h5, h6, producing more weaknesses on black's king side, also something that Hikaru has to worry about. Nakamura gets his knight out to c6. Now, rook c1 looks really natural. Garry seems surprised at that move as well. How does Hikaru defend the c-pawn after rook c1? Maybe that's what Garry's surprised about. White can also play rook g1 and continue to get things going on the king side. No, he goes rook c1. And Hikaru going knight d4, that was his idea. So what if Gary takes the pawn on c5? As Gary acknowledging, all right, that move, it was not such a bad move, yeah. But now I can take pawn on c5. And I don't really see Black's compensation. Hikaru has a pair of good-looking knights, but yeah, we have a trade on f3. One of the knights disappears, and Gary has slightly damaged pawn structure, but he's up a healthy pawn. He's still got the 2 bishops. He still has the g file and kingside pressure. White is much better here, but can Gary convert this into the full point? As he's dropping a little bit low on time. He's got about 2.5 minutes. He probably has to get his other bishop out. Maybe bishop d3. Maybe bishop h3. Whoa, rook up to h4. What a move as he activates his rook down the side. And he might bring it over to the queen side with rook h to c4. He doesn't want to give up control of any of these open files. And Hikaru's in trouble here. Now, Hikaru could play rook c8, but then Gary could double up on the c file. This is looking really dire. Hikaru doesn't seem too concerned, though. He goes rook b8, hitting the pawn on b2. Now, the natural move here is b2, b4. Maybe Hikaru wants to play a5 and tear open that b file, but that would involve sacrificing another pawn. That looks really dangerous. Okay, a6 by Hikaru, slowing down the progress of Gary's pawns, not allowing b5. Now, Gary still like bishop c4 here. Rook d4, lots of possibilities. Gary's going to have to speed it up a little bit here. Hikaru is not someone you want to get into acute time pressure with. He will produce problems regardless of the position. Gary hesitating a little bit here. Signs of anxiety. Gary can sense that he's pretty close to winning this game. Rook d4, centralizing his rook, putting more pressure on the knight on d5. Now he wants to play bishop c4, and that bishop on d7 is undefended, so Hikaru gets it to b5. That's a nice move, and that's why Hikaru played a6. Now, if Gary trades, then the a file opens up, and the pawn on a3 is going to be weak. I think Gary should play bishop h3, get that bishop away, and that e6 pawn has been left undefended. And Gary goes bishop g2. Ooh, he wants to push his f pawn. That's a very interesting idea. He wants to play f3, f4, and potentially even f5 and soften up the knight on d5. Potentially, he could also take on d5 and trade his bishop in for another extra pawn. So we might see an opposite-colored bishop endgame on the cards with 1 or 2 extra pawns for white. Gary in almost no risk of losing this game, but can he continue pushing the gas pedal down? Let's see. Hikaru slows down the pawn with f5. Now, taking on d5 here, probably not the wisest idea because Hikaru would recapture with check. So maybe Gary should move his king to the side, and then he can take on d5 twice. You could also play bishop e3 to physically close that e-file down. I think that's probably what Gary has to do because otherwise Hikaru, all of his minor pieces are protected. No other weaknesses in the position. I think Gary's going to have to take on d5 eventually and try to win that opposite-colored bishop endgame with 2 extra pawns. Hesitating there, and he goes bishop f3, just sort of improving his position. Hikaru immediately responding with king h7. I think he's trying to get Gary as low on the clock as possible. Gary's got to make a decision here. How is he going to take on d5? He goes bishop c3. Okay, maybe he wants to play king d2. I think he wants to play king d2, get the king off of the e-file, and he does. Hikaru preemptively might be doubling on the e-file, and he goes rook d8. Okay, rook d8. Now Gary could take on d5, but that would involve allowing Black's rook to infiltrate to e2 at the end of the line. So maybe Gary has to continue improving his position, looks over at the clock, scratches his hair. Gary back in thought. He's below 2 minutes now. He's got to make a decision here. Is he going to take that knight on d5? And if not, how else do we improve your position? Hesitating. I think he was about to take it. Withdraws his hand back. Maybe bring the bishop back to b2 first. White is in no hurry. White can continue improving his position, but Gary finally decides to take the knight. E takes d5. Now, is he going to take that pawn on d5 and allow Black's rook to access e2? It's not the most dangerous thing in the world because White can just drop the king back to d1. Takes on d5. Hikaru doesn't seem too happy. Now, Hikaru has a decision to make. Is he going to trade the rooks or does he play rook e2 check first? I think Black has to trade the rooks and then go rook e2 check and try to get as many of White's pawns on the second rank as possible. Maybe take on f2 and then try to take on f4. This is looking really, really bad, though. But the pawn on g7, that's being aimed at by White's bishop, and that pawn could be targeted if White's rook ever gets on the 7th rank. So Hikaru, not only is he down 2 pawns, but he has the potential to lose the pawn on f5 and also lose the pawn on g7. He might be down 3 or 4 pawns in the blink of an eye. So a lot to think about here for Nakamura as he tries to find a way to save this very, very difficult position. What is he going to do? Will he keep the second rook on the board? He could play rook d to e8, but then Gary could close down the e-file with bishop e5. Okay, he decides to trade, and he goes rook d7. He actually trades another pair of rooks. Okay, Now, what a decision that is. Now, Gary up 2 pawns, but can he win this endgame? Opposite color bishop endgames can be drawn even if one side is down 2 or even 3 pawns. So Hikaru, he has to try to get his king over to the queen side, because what Gary's going to try to do is create a passed pawn where he has the 2-on-1 on the queen side. Gary has to get his king there as quickly as possible and then try to go a4, b5 and create a passer before Hikaru can get his own king to the queen side, because the f-pawns are totally futile. They're doubled. They're not going anywhere. And h6 by Gary. He's trying to keep Black's king as far away from the queen side as possible. That makes sense. Now, Hikaru could have played king g7, but he goes king h5. He goes the other way. That's a little surprising, but he goes to the king side. Hikaru is trying to take Gary's pawns in the time that Gary takes to create a pass, or bishop d2. Gary has to keep his f-pawns alive, because if he doesn't, Hikaru's going to sacrifice his bishop for the queenside pawns, and Gary will have no pawns left. But Gary could sacrifice one of the f-pawns and maybe anchor his bishop to the other one. If he could get his bishop over to g5, he would be winning, because he could create a passed pawn. You can see Gary nervous there. He's trying to calculate. He's got not a lot of time on the clock. Takes the queen for fidgeting. Now Hikaru has to decide, will Hikaru defend the a-pawn? I think he has to, because if Gary gets 2 passers on the queen side, then the game is completely over. So bishop b5 here, or bishop c8, I think is forced. And then Gary, he's going to try to combine a4, b5, and if he has an opportunity, he'll get his bishop across the board to g5 in order to anchor it to the f4 pawn. This looks winning for white. I don't see how Hikaru can get both of white's f-pawns. I just don't see it. And the king on f3, it's too far away from the queen side. Hikaru taking his time here. He doesn't have a lot of it himself. He's approaching 1 minute on the clock. I think he's got to go bishop b5. He's got to buy himself as much time as possible. Gary's just going to go a4 anyway, and he's going to sacrifice the a4 pawn for the a6 pawn, and then he's going to have a passed b pawn, and that pawn is going to rumble toward promotion. And if he can leave himself one of these f-pawns, then he's going to win. Hikaru doesn't see a move. He's down to 45 seconds. What is he going to do? You can see him deep in thought, the wheels turning in his brain. These endgames are often drawn. You can often build a blockade or a fortress, but a passed pawn is a bishop's worst enemy. Hikaru down to 30 seconds. He's got to make a move. He seems frustrated. I don't think he's finding a way to save the game. Bishop b5, and immediately Gary plays a4, dislodging that bishop from b5. Doesn't matter, Hikaru, he goes bishop f1, but Gary can now play b5 and create a passed pawn. Hesitating there. You don't want to play a5. Yeah, he goes b5. We have a trade. There's that passed pawn. Hikaru takes on f2. Gary has to keep the f4 pawn alive. He has to keep that pawn alive. But now bishop, where's the bishop going to go? Gary down to 15 seconds. What is he going to do? Bishop c1, king d1. But now he can play bishop b2. He can get his bishop to g5. Oh, I think Hikaru, that's it. I think he's going to go bishop e7, bishop g5, and then he's going to push the b pawn, and immediately Gary goes for it. Bishop e7. You can see the confidence. Hikaru resigns, and Gary Kasparov with an amazing win against Hikaru Nakamura. And if you want to watch more videos like this, click on the link in the playlist. Hope you enjoyed the legend winning another game.